The darkness of space was torn apart by the fiery plumes of refugees racing toward Earth. The ships of the Alvians, battered and ragged, stretched through the void as human transponders navigated them to a safe port. Amidst the wreckage of their civilization, they held out the hope that humanity would not give up. "We accept them." These words became historic when the President of the United Nations announced the opening of Earth's borders to thousands of Alvian refugees. Despite economic hardship, depleted resources, and the alarming hiss of alien ambassadors to the Galactic Council, humanity did not hesitate to lend a helping hand. Alvians were deployed in cities around the world, from the domes of New Bangkok to underground shelters in the Canadian Rockies. Human volunteers tutored their children while their elders struggled to find work on an unfamiliar planet. Anxiety was in the air, but hope was alive. Aboard the command ship of the Dreg'Nor fleet, their leader, Supreme Commander Kalek, sat in the shadows, his red eyes burning with hatred. "They hide there like rats," Kalek said. "They're soft-bodied people. They fear blood. Give them an ultimatum. Either they turn over the refugees or I will carve out their planet." His advisor, Sahara, leaned forward. "Commander, these people survived on a planet that our biologists consider uninhabitable. They do not have an interstellar empire, but their endurance and cunning are alarming." Kalek dismissed it. "Their weakness is their compassion. They will sacrifice themselves to protect outsiders." A week later, the ultimatum arrived on Earth in the form of a giant dreadnought in orbit. The huge hull, covered with spikes and cannons, hovered over the night side of the planet. Kalek's voice boomed over all frequencies. "Hand over all Alvian refugees, or your planet will be wiped from the face of the galaxy." U.S. President Michael Harding sat in a dark conference room, his face illuminated only by the red glare of alarms. A projection of the Dreg'Nor fleet. Dozens of giant warships glowed on the wall. "We can't surrender them," insisted Emily Smith, the head of the Department of Defense. "And we can't fight a fleet that has burned entire planets," replied the Foreign Affairs advisor. "What if they only hit our military bases?" suggested General Hayden. Harding listened in silence, then finally spoke. "This is not an ultimatum, it is an offer of surrender, and we will not accept it." That same evening, Ambassador Dreg'Nor received a reply from the Earthlings. The words were terse, but their meaning made him burst with rage. "Earth does not trade in the lives of innocents." Kalek looked at the text and smiled. "Then they will die." His fingers reached for the command to launch the attack. Little did Dreg'Nor know that at that very moment they had made the biggest mistake of their history. They had chosen to challenge a deadly race that survived in conditions where others had faded away. Humanity did not play by the galactic rules. They created their own. The Apollo Prime lunar base was a quiet outpost of humanity located on the gray surface of the satellite. It functioned as a scientific center and a military observation post. Hundreds of engineers, scientists, and soldiers went about their daily routine, unaware that this night would be their last test. The darkness of space was torn apart by bright flashes as the Dreg'Nor ships emerged from hyperspace. The lunar sensors detected the invasion too late, as the first pulses of plasma volleys were already tearing through the vacuum. "Alert! Orbital platforms launch!" shouted Colonel Marcus Blake, the base commander. The moon came to life. Cannon batteries emerged from the rocks, and dozens of platforms with kinetic missiles activated in orbit. "Target the flagships!" Blake ordered, his voice booming over the speakers. The orbiting platforms unleashed a barrage of fire. Giant projectiles made of uranium rods flew out of the launchers, accelerating to hypersonic speeds. When the first of them hit the advanced group of Dreg'Nor cruisers, the metal hulls of the enemies opened up as if torn apart by giant claws. But this was only the beginning. A detachment of strike ships separated from the Kalek flagship. Their antimatter-loaded cannons ripped out waves of fire that swept across the lunar surface, demolishing entire sectors of the Apollo Prime base. The humans tried to return fire, but the plasma volleys penetrated their shields, scorching the hulls of the stations. "The main reactor is critical. We can't hold them off," the technician's voice boomed over the speaker. "Transfer power to the anti-missile systems," Blake ordered. "It won't work," the assistant shouted. "Their energy charges will destroy our systems before we can even get a shot." The colonel clenched his fists, realizing that he was running out of options. "Evacuate personnel to the transport gateways. Blow up all military installations immediately." The siren wailed in the corridors. The surviving scientists and soldiers ran through narrow passages to the evacuation pods. The fire had already consumed most of the compartments, and the oxygen was gradually burning out through the holes. "Everyone evacuated," said Lieutenant Jackson. Colonel Blake, standing on the bridge, took one last look at the monitors. Through the wormhole, he saw the Dreg'Nor landers landing on the lunar surface. "One last gift from us, you bastards," he muttered as he activated the detonation code. A second of silence. Then the nuclear blast shot upward, destroying everything within a 30-kilometer radius. The Dreg'Nor troopers were shattered into atoms, and the debris of the base flew off into space. Silence reigned aboard Kalek's flagship. The commander stood staring at the battle projection, irritated and bewildered. They destroyed their own base? Sahara couldn't believe her eyes. "A desperation tactic," Kalek growled. "A primitive gesture. They lost a moon base and we only lost a few ships. And they were able to stop us." Sahara did not share his confidence. Kalek just scowled. "That's okay. Their pride won't let them back down. They will lose everything." On Earth, darkness reigned. News of the fall of the lunar base spread around the world, causing a wave of panic. "What's the casualty count?" asked General Nathan Reynolds. 260 soldiers and 80 civilians, replied the aide. Reynolds clenched his fists. "They're not going to get away with this." A few hours later, new ships launched from military shipyards in Earth's orbit. They were much smaller than the Dreg'Nor vessels, but each was equipped with sophisticated anti-missile systems, adaptive shields, and experimental electronic warfare. They bore slogans on their sides. For Apollo Prime, we remember. Death to the invaders. On the bridge of the flagship Titan, Captain Lindsay Hale announced over the intercom, "Today we will show them that humanity is not only surviving, we are winning." The fleet launched into space. The Dreg'Nor did not know that a completely different war awaited them. A war where the enemy thought 3 moves ahead, preparing a trap that no one could see until the last moment. People were preparing to show that death is not the worst thing that can happen to the enemy. The worst thing is to think you have won and suddenly realize that this is exactly what your enemy wanted. The Earth's fleet slipped through the black void of space like shadows among the debris. Dozens of small ships, armed to the teeth but with their engines turned off, drifted in the asteroid belt. Their hulls were covered with special alloys that absorbed scanning waves, making them almost invisible to Dreg'Nor sensors. Captain Lindsay Hale stood on the bridge of her flagship Titan, studying the tactical map. "They're walking right into a trap," whispered her senior tactician, Lieutenant Gabrielle Pierce. "Any closer," Hale clenched her fist. "Don't rush them. Let them trap themselves." Aboard the cruiser Unbreakable, the Dreg'Nor fleet moved slowly but surely. Supreme Commander Kalek stood in front of a hologram showing a planetary asteroid belt. His fleet was stretched out in a long battle line, a classic formation for clearing hidden mines and obstacles. "They'll run into that belt like rats into a hole," Kalek smiled. "It's risky," his advisor Sahara said. "The humans know this part of the system well. They can't do anything." Kalek snapped back. "Their tactics are chaotic and primitive. Our sensors are picking up their every move. We'll burn them along with the rest of the wreckage." He was wrong. The Dreg'Nor ships entered the asteroid belt, their scanners constantly searching for human ship movements, but there was nothing. "Where are they?" grumbled the captain of the Bloodclaw, one of the Dreg'Nor heavy cruisers. Suddenly, a small metal object separated from one of the asteroids. It seemed like an inconspicuous piece of debris until it burst into a blue flash. "A mine!" the officer yelled. But it was too late. The explosion rocked the ship, hitting its fuel compartment. A column of fire exploded into space, sending debris flying into neighboring ships. "They've set traps!" screamed Sahara as another series of explosions tore through the fleet. Lindsay Hale watched with satisfaction as her plan came to fruition. "Phase 1 complete," she said into the comms. "Omega and Gorgon teams, proceed." Among the debris and rocks drifting in the void, dozens of human ships suddenly activated. Their engines ignited simultaneously, and they rushed toward the enemy. The Dreg'Nor commanders did not have time to react. The human ships did not attack them directly. They split into groups, rushed through the ranks of the enemy ships, and began firing at the asteroids. The stone blocks, which had previously seemed only passive objects, began to move. The humans mounted special gravity generators on them, allowing them to be directed precisely at the Dreg'Nor fleet. Huge asteroids ricocheted from the explosions, destroying entire cruisers. One rock, the size of a small city, slammed into the flagship Bloodclaw, breaking it in half. Kalec watched in horror. His fleet, which once looked invincible, was now torn apart and separated. "This is not possible," he muttered. "This is not possible." "These are humans," replied Sahara quietly. "They do not fight like we do." In the cockpit of her ship, Captain Hale watched as the Dreg'Nor fleet began to retreat. "They are not broken yet," she said. "Let them savor their defeat. Let them think there's still a chance for victory." "Why don't we finish them off now?" asked Lieutenant Pierce. Hale smiled. "Because fear will do more than any weapon. They need to know that they are now hunted." The Earth fleet returned to base, their ships barely damaged. Not only had the humans survived, they had won a battle that the Dreg'Nor had not expected. Aboard his flagship, Kalec stood silently in front of the porthole window, looking at the wreckage of his ships drifting among the asteroids. "They can think," he muttered. "And it's not over yet," added Sahara. Kalec clenched his fist until it crackled. "We will wipe them from the face of the galaxy." But there was no longer any confidence in his voice. The quiet evening in the city of New Oslo was broken only by the soft hiss of rain on the glass roofs. People walked the streets, unaware that they had been watched for hours by the cold, ruthless eyes of Dreg'Nor-esque saboteurs. 5 agents sat in a dark room atop an abandoned skyscraper. Their massive figures were wrapped in dark cloaks, and small devices with bright blue indicators gleamed on their belts. The captain of the sabotage team, Natek, checked the timer on his communicator. 90 minutes to signal," he wheezed in his metallic voice. "Power grid control center, communications hubs, transportation hubs, these apes have no idea how vulnerable they are." "And it's their own fault," his partner Rexshore snorted. "Humans don't guard their cities because they think war is something that only happens in space." Natek smiled ominously. "Soon they will realize their mistake." But that evening in New Oslo, there was another group at work, the humans, and they knew the storm was coming. A Central Intelligence Agency agent, Captain Marcus Drake, sat in a van in front of an old building, watching suspicious activity through infrared goggles. The 5 silhouettes moving silently around the top-floor room were a clear sign of trouble. "We see them," he whispered into his communicator. "They're activating devices. Looks like backfire generators. If they trigger this, half the city will go dark." "Wait for the signal," the voice on the other end of the line said. "We want them all at once." Natek set the last device on the metal panel that controlled the city's power grid. "Activating in 1 minute," he barked. "Prepare to retreat." Suddenly, the door flew off its hinges with a crash. On the floor now." Black figures burst into the room, guns drawn. Agent Drake was the first to enter, his rifle locked on Natek's sights. "You're surrounded. Get down on the floor or we will open fire." "Push the button," he barked at his subordinate. Rexshore rushed to the panel, but suddenly there was a loud flash. A small device on the panel suddenly popped out and exploded, emitting a high-frequency signal. "What the hell?" Natek looked around in panic. "It was a faulty device," Drake sneered, not lowering his weapon. "Your toy was tampered with when you installed it." Natek growled in rage, but before he could respond, a blow to the head with the butt of his gun sent him into the darkness. Aboard Kalec's flagship, his advisor, Sahara, received a message from the agents on Earth. Her face turned pale. "What happened?" asked Kalec, his eyes narrowed. "They knew," breathed Sahara. "The humans intercepted the entire group, and the devices were fake. They were playing us from the beginning." Kalec slammed his fist down on the control panel. "That's impossible. How could these apes have figured out our plan?" "They knew we were coming," said Sahara quietly, "and they outplayed us." At the headquarters of the Unified Command, General Nathan Reynolds watched the interrogation video of one of the captured saboteurs with a grim smile. Natek, his face battered, sat silent, only his eyes glowing with cold hatred. "They won't try any more sabotage," Agent Drake said as he entered the general's office. "We've shown them that any attempt to play the underground will cost them dearly." The general nodded. "And now they're scared," he added. "We've made them realize that humans don't just fight. We fight in ways they don't know how." Aboard his ship, Supreme Commander Kalec stood in a darkened room and stared at a screen showing Earth, a small blue ball in black space. "These people," he muttered, "they don't play by our rules." "That's why they're dangerous," said Sahara, "and why they've survived on a planet that would have killed us in minutes." Kalec inhaled heavily, his pride shattered. Next time, his eyes narrowed and his voice turned cold, next time they won't be ready. Perhaps, said Sahara, but there is one problem. What is it? Growled Kalek angrily. They are always one step ahead of us. Kalek remained silent. For the first time in his career, he felt more than just anger. He felt fear. Waves of fire cut through the black sky above the Earth as the Dreg'Nor fleet emerged from hyperspace. Hundreds of heavy cruisers, landing barges, and battle platforms stretched across the sky like a metal tornado. In the center of the formation stood the flagship of the Kalek, the giant ship Unbreakable, which could smash half a continent with a single salvo. On the command bridge, Supreme Commander Kalek stood with a cruel smile. They think we're going to retreat? His voice was low like a clap of thunder. Tonight we're going to turn their planet to ash. All ships to battle formation, added Sahara, standing beside him. Chaos reigned in Earth's orbit. All space stations received emergency signals. Code Black, galactic aggression, all forces to the defense. General Nathan Reynolds stood in the NORAD command center looking at the tactical display. Hundreds of red dots were closing in on the planet, and the human forces, far outnumbered, were preparing for the final battle. Start shield generators. His voice was calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest. Let them know that Earth will not be broken so easily. Beneath the surface of the oceans, in large concrete domes, giant shield generators activated. Fields of energy shielding grid rose over cities, military bases, and strategic facilities. The blue dome covered the continents, flickering like a giant lightning bolt. The first volley of Dreg'Nor fell into the atmosphere. Giant spears of fire flew through the sky, but when they hit the shield, powerful explosions turned them into clouds of ionized gas. They're holding, the communications officer shouted. This is just the beginning, Reynolds muttered. Prepare the assault squadrons. In the dark space orbiting the Earth, hundreds of small ships hid in the darkness, light attack craft, each equipped with modular combat systems. They did not look like traditional fighters. These machines were designed for speed and maneuverability. Phantom, East Wind, and Titan squadrons are in position, reported Squadron Commander Major Sarah Holt. Stand by for the signal, replied Reynolds. Small patrol ships? He said mockingly. Shoot them down. The Dreg'Nor cruisers opened fire. Hundreds of cannons bombarded the space in front of them, trying to cover the stormtroopers with a barrage of fire. But these ships did not fight by the rules. The attack squadron split into small groups of 3, 5 ships, and rushed through the gaps between the volleys of fire. Their trajectories changed chaotically, forcing the enemy sensors to work at their limits. Phantom Group, fire on the forward battery, shouted Major Holt. The 4 attack aircraft burst into the dead zone in front of the bow of the Thunderclaw. They turned on the spot and simultaneously fired a swarm of rocket torpedoes aimed at the only vulnerable point, the point where the main gun was connected to the power system. The explosion tore the cruiser in half. Metal fragments the size of houses flew in all directions, hitting other Dreg'Nor ships. They're breaking us up, one of Kalek's officers shouted. Stay in groups! Deploy the firing platforms, barked Kalek. They won't hold. But it was too late. The human stormtroopers continued to attack in a haphazard but incredibly effective style. They acted like hunters, fast, cunning, and ruthless. Aboard the Titan, Captain Hale looked out at the scattered remains of the enemy fleet. They're retreating, she said with a cold smile. The Dreg'Nor fleet tried to retreat to a new position, but that was exactly what the human tactician had expected. Though the Earth forces were much smaller, they united the fleet in a model maneuver. The ships quickly formed a cordon around the enemy vessels, creating a so-called death beachhead. Laser batteries, kinetic cannons, and high-speed small torpedoes were simultaneously fired from different sides. The Dreg'Nor vessels, too large and clumsy, were unable to escape the ring of death. The last Dreg'Nor ship exploded in the cosmic darkness, illuminating the Earth's night sky with a red ball. Aboard the Unbreakable, Kalek stood in the darkness of the command bridge. They are cursed hunters, he whispered. They have turned my fleet into game. Sahara stared at the ruins of the fleet in silence. Commander, this is not their full strength. Kalek turned around slowly. What do you mean, not their full strength? Sahara looked him in the eye. Because they are not yet afraid. And if they are not afraid, it means they have something else in store. Kalek sank back into his chair in silence. They have outplayed us. The Dreg'Nor flagship, the Defiant, was a monster in every sense of the word. Its hull, the length of a city, was armed with gravity cannons, plasma generators, and lenses to focus energy charges that could scorch half the planet in a single salvo. On the bridge, Supreme Commander Kalek stood silently, watching the hologram of the Earth. "I want this planet reduced to ash," he wheezed. "Not a single survivor. Your will be done," muttered Sra. "And don't give me that look on your face," Kalek snarled. "They can't beat us this time." Back on Earth, in an underground command center near Washington, D.C., General Nathan Reynolds stood in front of a projection of defiance. The red marker in the center of the display pulsed like a demon's heart. "They brought this thing right to us," Captain Jesse Carter grumbled. "Maybe we should just offer them pizza and ask them to leave." "Brilliant idea," Reynolds smiled. "You order, and I'll prepare a plan." The plan was simple in its insanity. An assault team of elite paratroopers was to infiltrate the disobedient, find the reactor, and activate the self-destruct. In a dark hangar room, Captain Alex Mason surveyed his men. A dozen men in dark exoskeletons stood silently, checking their weapons. "So to recap," Mason began, "we infiltrate the enemy flagship, get through security, get past a bunch of deadly traps, and blow up the reactor. Anyone who doesn't make it out in time gets hot cremated in space. Any questions?" Private Rogers raised his hand. "What if we get spotted?" "Smile, say hello, and tell them you're a plumber." "I'm serious, Captain." "I'm serious too," Mason smiled. "Use the machine gun and try not to die." The assault team flew up to the flagship in a tiny boat that looked like a shipwreck. Under the guidance of brilliant engineers, the boat was equipped with passive radar wave absorbers, making it almost invisible. When they successfully docked with the hull of the disobedient, Sergeant Davis handed Mason a special device, a plasma cutter. "If it doesn't work," Davis grumbled, "you can just knock and ask to be let in." "If it doesn't work, I'll just say we're plumbers." "Very funny, Captain." "It wasn't a joke," Mason smiled. The infiltration of the ship went smoothly. Too smoothly. The flagship's corridors were nearly empty, with only a few patrols stumbling awkwardly along the red-lit passageways. "They're underestimating us," Mason muttered. "Send the drones." Two tiny aircraft slipped from Roger's backpack and flew down the corridors, scanning the room. "Center of the reactor is down 2 levels, Davis said. "Stay together and don't stop." Mason stopped talking when he saw the holographic image of Supreme Commander Kalek on the drone's monitor. "People, if you can see this, you are already inside," he said in his ominous voice. "I knew you would try this. The guards are on their way to you." "Great," Mason said. "Now they're expecting us." "So what do we do?" Davis asked. "Plan B." "Plan B is to run?" "Yes, run and run fast." They raced down the corridors, leaving explosives at the ship's nodal points. The enemy began to pursue them, but Drake knew he could outrun them to the center of the reactor. "The last charge is set," Roger shouted. "Great, time to make a run for it." On the Defiance command bridge, Supreme Commander Kalek watched the tactical screens, his fist shaking with rage. "Seal all exits! Lock them in!" But when the security doors slammed shut, Captain Mason was already standing at the airlock, remote detonator in hand. "Kalek, your men are true fighters," he said as he activated the device. "But they have forgotten that we are masters of chaos." The explosion rocked the ship. All reactor systems suddenly failed. The Defiant shuddered, and a bright flash tore the flagship apart. Mason and his men, far away from the wreckage, watched from a safe distance. "Well," Roger said, wiping his forehead, "the plumbing was successful." "I hope they don't get a bill for the repairs," Davis added. "Oh, trust me," Mason laughed. "They've already paid that bill." The remnants of the Dreg'Nor fleet, broken and demoralized, scattered across the system, their ships adrift in disarray. The once invincible armada now resembled a cluster of broken metal coffins. The burning wreckage of the disobedient still glowed in the darkness of space, a reminder that humanity was not only strong, but skilled at warfare. Aboard the flagship Titan, Captain Lindsay Hale watched the image of the enemy fleet being defeated. The silence in the command center was so thick that only the faint hum of the reactors could be heard. "They're retreating," Lieutenant Pierce muttered. "No," Hale replied, her voice as cold as ice. "They're not retreating. They're running away." "Should we pursue them?" Pierce asked. Hale shook her head. "No. Let them go back home and tell us what happened." "And what will they say?" Pierce said sarcastically. Hale smiled ominously. "That humanity cannot be conquered." Aboard one of the surviving Dreg'Nor cruisers, Supreme Commander Kalek sat in his captain's cabin, his red eyes staring into the void outside the porthole. His fleet was defeated, his pride destroyed, his empire humiliated. How? He whispered. How did they do it? They knew how we thought, she said. They knew our tactics, our weaknesses. They didn't fight as we expected. They fought as hunters. No, Kalek snarled, turning sharply. They fought like monsters. Maybe because they are, Sra replied. You wanted to break their spirit, and they broke yours. A week later, the Galactic Council was in a tense silence. Hundreds of delegates from all over the galaxy sat in the room, exchanging frightened glances. Representatives of the great empires, who until recently had considered humans nothing more than ambitious barbarians, were now looking at each other with concern. In the center of the room stood a figure, Admiral Emily Hart. She was calm, her uniform impeccably tailored, and her eyes looked coldly at the delegates. We didn't want this war, she said, her voice echoing through the room. We didn't want to fight, but when you came to our door with threats and weapons, we responded. The delegate from the Marathi system stood up, his tone sharp and mocking. Responded? You wiped out half the Dreg'Nor fleet. That was excessive. Emily Hart smiled, not warmly, not friendly, but with a predatory coldness that made many in the room hold their breath. They were trying to wipe us off the face of the galaxy, she replied. And that was their biggest mistake. You think this fear will save you? Another delegate shouted. Fear? Hart leaned closer to the microphone. Oh, we don't want you to be afraid of us. She paused, allowing these words to sink in. We want you to remember that there are people on a planet called Earth, and if someone decides once again that they can come to our home with weapons, we will show you what real fear is. That same evening, Supreme Commander Kalek stood on the deck of his damaged ship, adrift in the wreckage. He had received a message from home. The Dreg'Nor Empire had officially declared an end to its aggression against humanity. Kalek was now an outcast, disgraced and humiliated. His empire no longer believed in his invincibility. What now? Asked Sahara. Kalek stared silently into space. Now we wait, he whispered. For one day they will make a mistake, and then we will strike again. They won't make a mistake, she said, because now they know what it means to survive on a planet that tries to kill you every day. Kalek gritted his teeth. He knew she was right. Back on Earth at Apollo Prime Memorial Park, crowds of people gathered to honor the dead. Captain Alex Mason stood in his uniform, looking at the wall with the names of the fallen. A little girl approached him, holding a metal token with an engraved name on it. That's my dad, she said quietly. He died on the moon. Mason bowed his head. He was a hero, he said, and he's the reason we're all here today. The little girl smiled through her tears and held out a dog tag to him. Take this, she said. You are a hero, too. Mason took the badge and clutched it tightly in his hand. No, he whispered. Heroes are the ones who never came back. He looked up at the sky, where the wreckage of the Defiant still flickered. And we only taught them to be afraid.